Hello and welcome to Crushing Doubts Q&A every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. It is great to be here with you all. As usual, I am here to answer all of your mind-body questions. It's something that I've really come to love to do for multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is that I had so many questions when I was getting better. As many of you know, I had 8 years of chronic back pain myself, including mind-body symptoms really throughout my life, and there were so many questions that I needed answered. So I'm here to answer all of your questions. As usual, I just want to remind you guys of the format here. Of course, in the Q&A, you can ask questions on YouTube. You can ask it on Facebook. You can ask it on Instagram. And of course, I will answer that. But you can also send me an email at dan@crushingdoubt.org with any preloaded questions that are kind of ready to go in case we have times where there's openings for questions. So you can get your questions answered many ways, but you can also get them answered in my membership groups. So if you have kind of moment to moment experiences and you're trying to figure out how do I understand this, especially in the column system, come to my membership groups. You can get them on my website, www.crushingdoubt.org. If you want to get the basics of the whole system, that's the seminars. You can get that on the website as well. So the seminars are basically these courses that it's 8 sessions in the current setup. It's going to be 2 sessions. Actually, I'm breaking it down in a different way so it makes it easier for people to attend. But you can get all the information that you need on the mind-body experience as I see it and what to do about it. And then the membership groups are a time where you can interface with me. It's a little like this, but it's Zoom groups. It's personal. We can have back-to-back, dialogue and exploration of these questions, and it's cost-effective. So please do join me for any of it. We have some questions. I did have some preloaded questions, but we also have people who have already joined us here, and I'm going to prioritize those who are here directly. Miranda, good to see you here. Catherine Toomer's here. Kelly Cole is here. Maureen is here. And Alex JHS has joined us on Instagram as well. So thank you for joining here. We've got a question coming in from David here from YouTube. David here says, "Hey, Dan, I purchased your PDFs and I'm finding that doubt is definitely the column I need to be working in and also the major roadblock for me at this point. Just by using crushing doubt type mantra, to myself, I've been experiencing a lot of shifts and new symptom imperatives within one day. I've spent 7 months in the TMS community, and everything made my pain worse, even worse. Hoping you can help me understand the doubt column and framework and how to deploy, observe, articulate, and counter effectively. Thank you, Dan." Okay, David, thank you so much for this question. And I'm so glad that you're finding some changes at the very least. Changes are good when you've had 7 months of nothing that's going right and it's actually getting worse. And this is one of the reasons that doubt is such a key component to things. In the mind-body community, much as the people are doing great work and always trying their best, there are many times where people are not getting certain answers. And one of the ways that that can go is that people keep saying, well, think emotionally. What's going on for you emotionally? I call this beating your head against the emotional brick wall. And anytime you're beating your head against any wall, it's going to hurt. And what's happening is that people just aren't getting those answers. So, David, just by using this crushing doubt type mantra, you said, you're getting changes, shifts in symptoms. That's exactly what the doubt column is for. It's to break the supposed chronicity and to help you recognize you're actually in a moment-to-moment experience. Now you're in it, and that's actually good because what it means is now we can start to figure out, okay, how are these symptoms operating in the moment? There's 2 ways that that is going on. First of all, moment-to-moment experience in mind-body experience can be understood in the emotions column, where an emotion is an unconscious emotion is leading to the need to distract from the symptom. In David's case, that's not likely to be what's going on, though, because you've now broken the chronicity. Now doubt's looking for a new foothold. So, David, you're saying, help me understand the doubt column. Happy to do so. Of course, that's what I do best. What's happening is that your thought process has now changed, and now your physiology is changing. What I want to give you a sense of confidence about is we can get these thought processes under control. And you're asking the exact right question to do it. How do I do it? So, David made reference to something that I say about doubt column work. It is the 3 tasks of the doubt column: observe, articulate, and counter. For those of you who don't know about that part of my work, the idea is this: If doubt goes unobserved, which is frequently what happens, we don't recognize it as doubt. We just think it's true. So we have a worry. Let's say we have a worry that we've got some serious medical condition that hasn't been discovered. Well, I consider that to be unobserved doubt, because what that means is the doubt can run wild. We think it's true. So observing means to call your beliefs into question. So, David, we'd need to hear specifically from you. What are the beliefs that you're having about it? As an example, you might be saying, well, it started to shift. So that's a good sign. I think it's gonna work out. That's a thought process that's moving in the right direction. But you could say, well, I got rid of one problem and now it's out of the frying pan into the fire. That's a different thought process. And that's a doubt that we need to observe. And then what do we need to do? We need to articulate it. The next step is to articulate it. That means get it put into words. A lot of time, which of course you know what the word articulate means, but it is really important to get these doubts put into words. There are plenty of times where we just feel like, I just don't feel like I'm going to get better. That's an unarticulated doubt. It's a doubt, but it's not articulated. So the question is why? Why don't you feel like you're going to get better? I'll give you some examples. It could be that somebody says to themselves, I'm not going to get better because this symptom's harder to cure than others. That's the kind of thing that comes up a lot of times with migraines, as an example. It is regarded as a symptom that is harder to get better. It's not actually true, at least not all the time. It can be stubborn because of our belief systems about it. So we've got to articulate it. Maybe the articulation comes to, I believe that this is mind body, but I just don't know if I can do it. My obsessive mind's going to get in the way or something like that. That's level 3 doubt. That's a different kind of doubt. So let's get it put into words so we know specifically what we're dealing with. So we've observed it. We don't let it get away with posing as truth. We articulate it. We get it put into words and then countering it effectively. Now, this is where it's even more of an art form because only you know what the right counter is going to be. Now, I can offer suggestions. I can definitely help you get there. But we're going to need to try out some things because you have your specific mind. And your specific mind is the one that matters. It's the one that's thinking about things. It's the one that leads to whatever physiological experience comes up. So, David, I would say it was a short answer, but it wasn't. It was kind of a long-winded one. But hopefully it gave you a lot of information on the doubt column, how this stuff works. And let's do follow-up. Let me know if I answered your question to your satisfaction. But ultimately, I'll tell you this. Once you feel certain and clear about what's happening, those symptoms that are cycling through are going to start to calm down a lot. So you've made the first step. You've made the first step of breaking the chronicity and moving to kind of that rotation of symptoms. Now let's get this under control. I can help you with it, David. Just let me know. You can email me, dan@crushingdoubt.org. You can come to my groups. You can keep asking questions here, whatever you like. Just make sure you get your answers. Okay, Dorisa says, hi, Dan and everyone. Dorisa, it is good to see you here. Jane Smith says, hi, Dr. Dan. Thanks again for being here to answer our questions. I really value how you focused on pinpointing what helps or not in a particular moment, that all the work is moment dependent. So this is actually very, very important to say again and again. The work really is moment to moment. And one of the reasons the doubt column is so important is that we have thoughts and even experiences that are just the same over and over. So we don't think they're moment to moment. And that's what we've got to get. That's what we've got to get to. That's why a lot of people aren't getting better. They think it's operating differently, and it is. But it's because you got doubt. So the columns provide a system where we can recognize what is the nature of the problem at hand here. And even though some people can find it a little bit complicated at first, it really isn't. There are 3 columns. They're very simple in terms of what they're for. And I'll lay them out right here again because it's helpful to repetition anyway. The emotions column is for onsets and upticks in symptoms. And we recognize how the distractions coming in to protect from the emotion. If we disable that function, the symptom goes. In the doubt column, we're working on things that seem chronic. They don't change much, or they're very, very recurrent. And we've started to believe that they're always going to be there. Well, there, we observe, articulate, and counter. We've got to figure out what that is, and we've got to crush that doubt. And in the power column, we're talking about plateaus in recovery and dealing with trauma work. Those are the 2 things that go on in the power column. And what do we do there? Well, there we have to receive the communication of the symptom. The symptom actually wants us to know these things. There is a part of us that really wants to know what these questions are all about. what's going on in us, and it's trying to communicate. So receive the communication and you disable the function of the power column symptom. So 3 columns, 3 functions. You take away the function, you take away the symptom. We'll keep talking about it because I know it cannot always feel so simple in the moment, but thankfully the main idea is. Okay, we had a couple people join on Instagram I want to say hi to. We've got Lucy Jane has joined us here. Patty Girl's here. Justine has joined us. Positive Wellness has joined us. Michelle, it's good to see you here. And we've got a couple questions coming in from Instagram, and then I'll jump back over to YouTube. Okay, Catherine Toomer says, hi, Dr. Dan. I am finding that my unmedicated OCD brain continues to overpower me at times with doubt about many things in my life, self-doubt and huge anxiety to accompany the doubts and related decisions. Hold on one second. I pressed the wrong button there for a second. All this cuts deeply into my power. I know I badly need an action step in this arena. Here is what I have proposed. By the way, I totally agree with you, Catherine. Before we even get started, this is a power column issue. So good that you're recognizing the column, because the columns not only organize things, but they give you a chance to organize that thinking by saying, oh, you know what? This is that column. I don't need to be doing that other work. It's nice to be able to put down some work, I find. Okay. Catherine says, here's what I've proposed for her power column action step. Remember, action steps are ways that we're going to change what we think and do so that we change how the flow of the mind-body process is going. Catherine says to herself, remember that you are deeply loved. And from that knowledge, you can act with abandon, doing whatever love demands and or allows. And you can act from strength and not suspicion and doubt. Making sense to you? So here's what I'd say, Catherine. Yes, that makes perfect sense to me. I think that's a fantastic thing to be saying to yourself. Here's the real question, though. Well, there's 2 questions. 1, do you believe it? Because if you don't believe it, it's not going to help enough. And if you don't believe it, that's okay. Then we ask, why not? This is still a very helpful thing to be saying to yourself, 100%. I just want to point you in the direction of believing it. Okay? Now, the other thing that I'm thinking about in terms of saying this to yourself is, does it address the power column issue that's at hand? It might not. It might be that you're focusing on the love when it could be about not feeling like it's okay to be adventurous in the world, that the world just feels dangerous. So similar to the doubt column, I want to get this articulated. I want to get it understood. What's sapping your power here? What's keeping you from feeling that you can be in power? But you're 100% right. You're going to feel better in this situation when you're feeling powerful. What you just described is a situation of not feeling powerful. And I talk in the power column about how it relates to self, others, and symptoms. This is a way that you feel out of control, out of power with your symptoms. So I would say, let's start to challenge the idea that you have an OCD mind at all. You do have the experience of kind of an OCD experience, but that's been the way that you've always been when you had the setup you had. Now you're starting to play with the setup you have. The power column comes in. You have a chance to recognize, you know what? Maybe I'm not always going to be this OCD type person, because OCD, they're symptoms. They're a response to something that's going on in you, where obsessive thinking comes in as the symptom. So I want you're doing great, what you're bringing up. The question is, does it work? And if it doesn't work, that's okay. Let's go back and figure out why not. Let's figure out what's happening that's getting you out of power. And let's start to challenge things that tell us we're not powerful. So, Catherine, let me know if that makes sense to you. But bravo, you're doing good work. I think that's a great thought that you have. It could be completely right on. I know that it is right on for at least part of your power column. The question is it addressing what's happening right now? So let's find out what you think about that. All right. Jane Smith has a question coming in from YouTube. Could you please talk about your groups? For example, how long would a person who has a very intractable case of TMS typically expect to stay in a group? A month or 2, 6 months, a couple years? Okay, Jane, thanks for asking that question. In my experience, people get a lot of movement in the groups within a couple of months. It usually does not take longer than that to get a lot of movement. Now, do some people stay longer? Yes, but that's because they're working on another, issue along the line, and they're just continuing to make progress. Um, in my experience, though, especially for chronicity, it really should break in a couple months or less, sometimes less. My record is one time sitting with somebody, talking to them about these things, and boom, it's different. If that's not happening for you, I don't want you to worry about that. That's not typical. That means a big mindset shift happened very quickly. The groups are a chance to do it again and again, and that's important. Very few people get it done in one sitting. But I will say, typically, 6 months, I would not expect somebody to be in my group for 6 months and not getting results. That's not the goal. And it really doesn't fit with the model, because the model is simply, if you can understand it, it changes. Well, if you don't understand it in 6 months or less, then something's blocking that. And we would shift our focus and focus on that. But it's very rare for that to happen. Typically, people come, and I'd say 2 to 3 months is a good span of time to expect major, major changes. So, Jane, that's what I'd say about that. In terms of what the groups are, there are Zoom calls where we ask questions just like this. But the thing is, you get to see the interaction between me and other people. You get to have that interaction between me and you. So if I start to answer a question, you're like, actually, hold on, there's something more specific I want to say about this. Then boom, we get much more specific answers there. And I also think there is something healing about the group itself. It is a wonderful group of people. I feel better when I'm in that group. It's a group of people who, they have the same understanding. I mean, how often do we get that? When I was getting better, there was no group like that that I could go to, at least not that I knew of. And it was very, very lonely. And I had lots of questions. And the groups address the questions, they address the loneliness, they provide support, they provide information, just a ton of great stuff in there. And I know I'm tooting my own horn in terms of what I'm offering, but really, I'm not so much saying that because it's not all me. The group members themselves are such fan. I mean, you get a bunch of goodists together. We help each other. It's a great setup. So, Jane, if you're interested, or if anybody else is, please do contact me, Dan@crushingdoubt.org. Okay, Karen Isaacs, thanks for waiting patiently for your question to be answered. Karen says exactly what you said about migraines. So Karen has had migraines for a long time. The scariest one and first one for me. I dreaded it the most. When Dr. Sarno told me why I'd wake up with them is because we are close to subconscious upon waking. Dr. Sarno's theory about why I'd wake up with them made sense for me intellectually, but I never really clicked with it. At some level, I think I hung on to them because they were my friend. They were such learned responses. So that makes sense to me, Karen. Now, just to update this Q&A group, my understanding, Karen, is you've come very, very far with that. I know that you can get migraines from time to time, but it seems like they don't last nearly as long, and you're not getting them very frequently. And that's a major, major upgrade in your life. So, Karen, let me know if I have that wrong. I don't want to misrepresent what it is that you've experienced. But I think it can be nice also to just have your symptom highlighted when you're really struggling with it, and recognize as, that one's pretty hard. Back pain also, there's an advantage to having back pain in that Sarno wrote books directly about it. It's just very obviously, yes, I recognize that symptom. But it's still a terrifying thing. When people first get it, it happens to me all the time. People say to me, "Is this what you were experiencing?" They didn't realize. They just thought, "Oh, it just hurts a little." No, because it's not just the hurt, it's the fear. That's why the doubt column is so important, or one of the many reasons. Okay, Karen, thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that you have come so far with the doubt and fear. I know that this work in the doubt column has added to the things that you got out of working with Nicole Sachs and a couple of other people. So it's good to see you on a good part of your journey and continuing to expand your power now, which is another thing we work on here. So glad to have you with us, Karen. Okay, Positive Wellness says this from Instagram. Is there a visual of the columns that we can find somewhere, Dr. Dan? Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for thanking me. I appreciate that. You guys really do keep me going. I get a lot of positive feedback. People People don't realize how much it means when you reach out and tell me that what I did and said helped you. A lot of times people get help and I don't know. I'm glad they're getting help, and that's the main thing that matters. But when you tell me, it keeps me going. It's really nice to hear. So the visual of the column system that you're looking for, um, it comes in something called the three columns mind body guide, which you can get on my website. It's www.crushing.org. And there are 4 mind body guides. One of them is called the 3 columns guide. And there is an actual visual of them, where it's actually laid out for you and you can fill it out that way. The columns name comes from an exercise that I call the mind body map. So when I used to do these short-term consultations, mostly now I do seminars and groups. When I used to do these short-term consultations, I would have people take a piece of paper and actually divide it into columns. And that's where they get the name from. So the emotions column, as we've talked about, it covers those acute onsets and upticks. The doubt column covers your thinking and how it leads to supposedly chronic experience. And then the power column deals with plateaus and trauma and your relationship with you. The visual you're looking for is in that PDF, which is, that's a really great question to ask. And I'm glad you highlighted it because I'm writing my book and I'm thinking, well, it's interesting. The visual isn't even in the book. Maybe I need to have it in the book and I'll think about that. But for now, at the very least, you can get it in the 3 columns mind body guide. So hopefully that is helpful. And by the way, that guide doesn't just give you the visual. It takes you through step by step. How do you build this column? What are you doing in this column? So it's a concentrated version of some of the things that I talk about. Okay, Patty Girl 75 says, can trauma cause OCD? Childhood trauma specifically. The short answer to that is yes, absolutely. In fact, I would argue that some form of trauma is likely to be playing a role in anybody's OCD. And think about it. There's a lot of people with OCD. So that tells us something. There's a huge amount of trauma that's not really getting labeled trauma. And I think I know parts of why. One of them is that many people who have suffered trauma don't want to think about it that way. It makes it more upsetting to label that, at least at first. That's how people think of it. I've come to see it as, no, it's actually self-empathy. I'm recognizing, no, trauma. Well, let's define trauma. Trauma is an experience that changes you, and it changes you forever. It's a really big event of some kind. And it doesn't have to be a big event it doesn't have to be an event that others would say is big. It's whether it meant something big to you. And that can lead to all kinds of things. OCD is really it's a set of symptoms. It's a set of behaviors and thought processes that are all trying to deal with anxiety, some kind of issue that's coming up, and trauma brings more of that than anything. So that's that's the medium answer, Patty Girl. Let's follow up as needed if you need more information on that. Okay, Rita, good to see you here. Daniel Starkey, good to see you here. Scotty always gives these wonderful hellos. Good to see you. East Coast Angling has joined us here. And East Coast Angling asks, what do you think of Dan Buglio's work? So I really like Dan. I think he's a great guy. I think that he helps a lot of people. I know that he releases these videos, I think, on a daily basis, which can really be quite helpful for a lot of people. And here's what I would say about it. I've thought about this in terms of the mind-body world. Each of us offers different things. If you talk to anybody who's really an expert in this field, we tend to think very similar things overall. We've got, I was just talking to Dave Clark about this, who is the president of the PPDA. And he said, basically we agree on 98% of things. That 2% is an interesting debate, and it brings up interesting questions. Now, you could certainly debate that number, but I would say the mind-body community is pretty unified in the overall understanding of what's happening. And essentially it's this, that the mind is affecting the body. Well, Dan Buglio, one of his most important pieces of information that he gives is to teach people to be indifferent to the symptoms. Don't pay too much attention to them. And here's what I think about Dan's work. I think Dan's work is exceptionally good for a subset of people. within the mind-body field. And he has more variety than that. I don't want to sell him short in terms of what he does because I don't even fully know. I just know that each one of us has certain things that we do that provide information. One of the reasons I like my column system the best is that it has an overarching picture. So Dan Buglio's idea of indifference, it fits into the picture. That's a part of how, for instance, we get power over our symptoms, or it's a part of how we reduce doubt. So there's lots of ways in which all of these things fit into the column system. And that's what I've tried to do, is to make a system that actually covers the full range, because so many of the sufferers out there are asking questions. Do I trust this person, this system, this system? It's hard to know. And ultimately I would say, I'm not trying to get you to trust my system. I'm trying to show you that my system describes the whole experience, no matter who you're looking at. Dan Buglio's version of it, Nicole Sachs's version of it, Howard Schubiner's, I could go on and on. They all have versions that, to me, fit into the columns system. The column system are meant to describe the whole thing. But I think Dan Buglio's work is fantastic. I appreciate what he's doing for so many people. I know he helps a lot of people. And, if you're getting help from him, great. If you run into a snag, it doesn't mean what he does doesn't work. What he does work. It just may need a particular angle. And sometimes the column system can help with some troubleshooting. So East Coast angling, tell me if that makes sense to you. Okay, Positive Wellness says, thank you. I appreciate your question, and we will keep it up. All right. Karen Isaacs says, yes, exactly. Much less in frequency about the migraines, much less in severity. When I wake up with them, I tell them to F off. They go away. So, this is an important thing to say also. We all wish that we just didn't have symptoms anymore, but it is the human condition to have some symptoms. What my goal is with the columns is to take chronicity out of the equation entirely. We want no chronicity. And we want the ability to control those acute symptoms. On top of that, I want you expanding your power in your life. If we do those three things, that's the three columns right there in a nutshell, and we make massive progress. So Karen, I'm so happy for you, and I'm so glad you're part of this community and the mind-body community in general, and glad you're doing better and growing. Very exciting to see. Okay, Patty Martin, good to see you, Patty. Patty says, no one has helped me as you have, Dan. Very sweet, Patty. And I love the group for support. So Patty is in the group, and she is one of those fantastic members that makes it a really special place. I have not been this happy for many, many years. Patty, that makes me so happy to hear. Patty's gotten significant relief. And I think she also feels like I do, that this group is something special. I sit in that group and I'm just happy to be there. It's just so nice. It is the best people. And we help each other, not only in a supportive way, but in an informational way. We share information, and I share information too about my own experience and why I think about it. So it's a special place. And Patty, you're a special part of it. Thank you so much for sharing that. It means a lot to me. So glad that you are doing so well with it. Okay, Scotty says from Instagram, are you able to explain how some structural findings are to cause pain in rare cases, but that most don't? For instance, can you have bone on bone and still be pain-free? Love this question, Scotty. Here's what I would say. Structural things do not cause pain across the board, except in acute situations that relate to a blunt force trauma or some kind of medical issue. So your body heals. I just had this happen recently. I hurt my foot, and it was a legitimate collision. And it hurts. It's getting better. It's going to heal. But doubt was like, ooh, I can have a field day with this. I'm going to try to play with him here. Now, of course, it's not going to get very far with me. But, healing takes place in a predictable pathway. So if you break a bone and doctors say it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks to heal, that's what it's going to take to heal. So it has to be something like that. Bone on bone is not one of those things. Bone on bone is one of those things that gets attributed as causing pain. But not only is there no proof of it, there's actually proof against it. There are studies that show, and the PPDA website, by the way, is fantastic for this. So go to ppdassociation.org, and I believe that is the right address. I gotta get this down. I need to write it down somewhere. But they have a bibliography, and you can actually search like bone on bone or osteoarthritis, and it comes up with all the studies that show this in the New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA, all the best. But here's the thing. I think that logic really should hold together very, very well across the board. If it doesn't, something's wrong. So the fact that none of the, or let's say this, a lot of these structural issues have been proven to not cause pain. What are the chances that one structural issue does? It's not very high at all of these supposed structural issues, they're all things that we can imagine would cause pain. It sounds painful, bone on bone. But look, if you bump your fists together, that's bone on bone right there. I mean, there's not a lot of skin between. Does it really hurt? No, not at all. And so we've got to challenge that idea. I understand why it seems like it could hurt. And people would even argue, well, isn't cartilage there for a reason? Listen, we have an appendix. It's not there for a reason. Evolution changed these things. These things were meant to be cushions, and they probably do help some, but do they cause that much pain when they're not there? I don't think so. None of it adds up. Not to mention the fact that I've worked with many people who have bone on bone and their symptoms change. The proof's in the pudding. Let's keep talking about it, Scotty, but let me know if that makes sense. Okay, East Coast Angling says Alan Gordon and you and Dan Buglio should do a podcast together. Oh, that would be great. I've talked to Alan about possibly doing something, and Dan has actually been on my podcast. I got to interview him, which was a wonderful experience. Both of them are such great guys with great ideas. I'm totally with you. We'll do that. Okay, Patty Girl is talking about some of the trauma that she had, verbal abuse and mental abuse from a parent. Okay, let's talk about this. There's certain traumas that are going to cut really, really deep. And that's one that it's interesting. A lot of people could say, oh, well, it's not like you were, a prisoner of war. I'm telling you, in many ways, there's nothing worse than verbal and mental abuse from a parent. Physical abuse and sexual abuse, when it crosses that line, it takes it to a new level. But verbal and mental abuse can be so debilitating to people because it cuts to the heart of who you feel you are. And this is part of what's useful about the columns is the power column is a place where you can actually reverse that. I have something called the core narrative, and that is where you tell the story to yourself about your core suffering self. And you pinpoint, and it's essentially a way to mourn these losses and recognize what you've been through and learn self-empathy. So I would say, Patty Girl, based on what you're saying, power column work would be very, very, very helpful for you. And I'd love to talk with you about it. So if you feel like it, email me, dan@crushingdot.org. We can talk about options. Would love to help you with it. Sapphire Network has joined me here. And by the way, the Sapphire Network is the network that a lot of my productions, including this one, are ultimately going to go towards. We're working on getting it up and running. It's not quite there yet, but getting close. It is actually up and running from the vantage point that you can see our documentary. I don't know if you guys got to hear about this, but I did a documentary called Trials to Triumph with a great guy, Freddie Stevenson, who wanted to make it in the NFL. That was his dream. And when it didn't work out, he had to put his life back together. He's now a motivational speaker. There's a really uplifting and cool story about it. So you can check that out at www.sapphirenetwork.com. And Sapphire, by the way, is spelled Safire, not the usual way you spell Sapphire. Okay. East Coast Angling continues, says, I had a near perfect childhood with no trauma at all. My chronic symptoms, BMS, came from hypochondria. So, one thing I want to say is that a lot of times people can say they had a perfect childhood, and I'm not saying you didn't, but you can have, there's so many ways to not have a perfect childhood. You could have like it go very smoothly with great parents and all that, but just inside feel, let's say, burdened by trying to be good all the time. I mean, we can have trauma just from being ourselves. So it doesn't have to come from seeming horrific things. What I want you to do is to find out why. Why do you experience life the way you do? And the columns really do describe some of that. Okay, I'm going to jump back over to some YouTube comments. Elizabeth Baggish says, I love the idea of crushing the doubt. So important. Does your system also talk about graded exposure or good ways to get back to moving? Is that part of the power column? Great questions, Elizabeth. Here's what I'd say. I don't really do graded exposure per se, but this is doubt column work, actually, much more than power column work. Power column work is a place that you get to when doubt is actually brought down significantly low, because a plateau means your doubt is pretty much under control. You know your emotions pretty well, but somehow the symptoms just aren't getting fully better. That's usually about some kind of conflict in the self, and that's power column. What you're talking about with graded exposure is pure doubt column. It's, I don't know if I can move safely. I don't feel like this is going to be okay. And I suppose I do a form of graded exposure. Actually, Patty Martin and I did something like this, where I talked her through what to be thinking when you move, because it doesn't matter what you do. It matters what you think while you do it. And I instructed her to think about things emotionally. As an example, Elizabeth, you could, let's say you're having trouble getting out of a chair. Well, when you're getting out of that chair, you're probably, without even realizing it, this is where articulation is so important and observing, you're probably thinking something like, this is going to hurt. This is going to hurt. This is going to hurt. Oh, it hurts. And all those things that you're saying to yourself are totally understandable, but they're feeding the thought process. Whereas what I say is, okay, remember that your body is a flowing emotion, meaning whatever happens in your body, including this pain, it relates to where your mindset is. So instead of thinking, oh, this might hurt, I want you to think instead, who am I in my life? What matters to me? How can I be powerful? And if you're thinking that way, you're going to get up differently. And if you do that just a little bit, that's a form of graded exposure. So, Elizabeth, I would say this is a way that the doubt column helps with that. The power column then will help more later. So hope that helps. Okay, Dorisa said, I listen to Dan almost every day. I believe she's talking about Dan Buglio in this case, just the daily reminders. So he helps a lot of people, and I'm glad to see him helping so many. Jane Smith says, on your website just now, when I click on memberships and learn more, it says the page I'm looking for does not exist. We're having this problem again. Okay. So Jane, I will contact the person who takes care of the website for me, and that will be taken care of. I think I actually, though, have a link that can work right now, and I might as well just get that for you. Give me 1 second and I will pull that up. Yes, this should be it. 1 second. I'm going to put this in the YouTube and I'll read it out for the people on Instagram. I think this will go to Facebook as well. Okay, I just listed it. It's crushingdoubt.clickfunnels.com/start-here. So I'll read it one more time. It's crushingdoubt.clickfunnels.com/start-here, HERE. So, Jane, I want you to check that out now and tell me if that one works. If it doesn't for some reason, we've got an even bigger problem, but I'm going to investigate. And either way, I can get you set up with it. If you want to email me, dan@crushingdoubt.org, I can take care of it, make sure it gets taken care of personally. So please do let me know. All right. Laura Court has joined us on Instagram. Good to see you here. Let me see if anyone else has joined that I have missed. Patty Girl says, thank you. You are welcome. Brian Orange is here with us as well. Thanks for joining us, Brian. Okay, back to some questions on Instagram. Jane Smith says, yes, it works. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to get that other one fixed. I don't know what's going on with it. We occasionally have these issues, but I have a good team that takes care of it very quickly. Okay, Catherine Toomer says, I do believe that I am deeply loved. I don't always feel it. I have felt lots of heartache of late in the midst of being loved. It seems to come from my set of OCD/TMS symptoms that bend over backwards to examine every negative feeling or thought I experience. I definitely think it is TMS in me, but if I let go of calling certain things as OCD related, then it seems I will engage all of these anxious doubts and will never climb out. Okay, so actually in this case, the labeling helps. Now let's remember this. Everybody has their own mind, and you have to build your system within my system, I say. What that means is some of the things I say are not going to work for you, and that's okay. Then we adapt. You tell me, and we adapt it. So that's not going to work. But let's jump back to what will. I know when I am not cynical or doubtful of being loved, then I can conquer anything. But you are right that I may need other action steps or articulation of doubt before the action step I propose will work. So I think this is such good power column work, Catherine. When we do the power column work, we're not just willing ourselves to feel loved when we don't feel it. We actually feel it. And that's going to be important. And I think if we go through the core narrative and we really go through this all, we can help you to feel that, you know what? I don't just know I'm loved, I actually feel it. I feel much more loved than I did before. And in many ways I didn't realize I didn't feel loved. And there was a comment before about having a kind of near perfect childhood. It's funny because in a way, so did I, and yet I also had a terrible childhood. Now I know that's not what you're saying that you had. I think was it East Coast Angling that said that. I want to make sure I have this right. Yes. So I'm not saying that you have the same thing, but there are so many ways in which we can have really good stuff. I mean, I had really great parents in a lot of ways. I truly did. They also were really not great in certain ways for me, and that it was an important distinction for me to become more comfortable with. That could be part of the problem for someone who's saying that they had a near perfect childhood. But then there are also people who really did have it just really very much the way they want. But yet, listen, we're human beings. It's not easy to be a human being. You can have a perfect childhood, and yet you're growing up in a world where you're born into a mortal body, and that's terrifying. So there's all kinds of things that can happen for people that can lead to trauma and worry. Okay, East Coast Angling says Nicole Sachs is helpful to many, but her work didn't help me as much as Alan and Dan Buglio. Nicole focuses heavily on childhood emotional trauma, and I had none. I purely was extreme and obsessive hypochondria. So I love this point for multiple reasons. As I said, in the mind body community, we all help people in different ways, and there are certain pockets of people we can maybe help more in certain ways. I've tried to build my system so I can really help everybody in different ways. But when you're finding that anyone in the mind body community, and I would include myself in that, is focused on a particular thing that doesn't feel so right to you, there are going to be other options. Now, my system has options even within the system. So if I'm saying to you, hey, I think there was emotional stuff, and then we find out, no, actually, there wasn't any of that, I have two whole other columns to go to. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. But I hear you on that. I know Nicole has helped tons and tons of people. And I would like for the whole mind body community to take some stock of whatever it is that they are doing and think, now what do I do when this doesn't work? What does that mean? And that's part of what I've done with my system, is to think about, what does it mean when something doesn't work and how do we address it? East Coast Angling says, bottom line is TMS is real and the brain is a place of so many unknowns, resulting in such a myriad of symptoms. So I think that is absolutely true. What I do want to add to the picture is that I'm hopeful that the column system provides a lot more knowing than we think is possible. Yes, there are unknowns, but try it out. The column system can describe a lot of things that you wouldn't think you could understand. And I think whatever helps you feel better about it is what matters. So for some people, knowing that there are just some unknowns can feel good. And for others, that's terrifying. So for those that it's terrifying, let's crush that doubt. For those that it's freeing, use it. Go ahead. Be you. Use your mind. It's great. Rody Jangles, good to see you here. Scotty says, thank you. You're welcome. Mac BNER has joined here as well. Thanks so much for joining. Okay. Now, Dorisa has a follow-up about listening to Dan every day. So Dorisa said, although recently he has been telling people that they should choose one coach or method and follow. Okay. Let's see. Dorisa then said, but for me, using different people helps me. Yes, I know you were talking about Dan Buglio. So this is an important point. Dorisa is saying, for me, using different people helps me. Well, this is why I say build your system within my system. Every person is different. Different things work for different people. The columns provide an option, a way to think about things. And I'm happy to put my head together with people about what's working, what's not, and make some adjustments. That's a big part of what we do in the groups. I'll talk to people and they'll say, well, I get your columns, but I keep running into trouble in this. What does that mean? What do I do? And we come up with something until it is to your satisfaction. It doesn't matter what I think. It matters what you think. And my goal here with the columns is to help make sense of that. Speaking of making sense, Elizabeth Bagger says, that makes so much sense. It is definitely doubt. So that was when we were talking about kind of graded exposure and movement. And so, Elizabeth, if I can be of help with that, let's connect. I mean, hopefully, I'm being of help already, and I think that I am because it makes more sense to you now. When things make sense, our anxiety goes down, and when our anxiety goes down, the whole central nervous system calms down. It's interesting. So many people in the mind body field actually focus on how do we calm down the central nervous system, but actually, it's very simple. We calm down the central nervous system when we aren't afraid. And how are we going to be not afraid? Information. When we get the right information, we become less afraid. And that's what this is all about. So guys, I want to thank you again for joining me for this Q&A. I'm here every week. I won't be here on the Thursday of Thanksgiving. That's the one week we'll have off, but otherwise we can keep right on rolling. It's one of the advantages of moving to Thursday is we steer clear of all those Monday holidays. So Thursdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. I'm here to answer all of your questions about the columns, about the mind-body experience in general. Ryan Edson, I see you saying thank you from Facebook. It is good to see you here. And it's a pleasure, guys. Keep the questions coming. You can send me an email, dan@crushingdoubt.org. You can go to my website, www.crushingdoubt.org, for any of those resources. I'm still working on the book. It is taking a while because I got to get it right. And there's a lot of things about it that need to be right to present it to you guys in the right way. So Jane Smith says, thanks again, Dr. Dan. Really helpful as always. And I've really enjoyed your series with Katie. Thank you so much for saying that, Jane. I did another 4-session consultation series with a woman named Katie, delightful woman who really took to it very well and is getting a lot out of it. So check out Crushing Doubt on YouTube if you want. You can check it out on Spotify if you want to get the audio version. Some people prefer to listen to it. So lots of ways to interface with me, including the seminars and membership groups. I will get that problem fixed on the website. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. All right, same time. Thanks, guys.